Okay, I guess it's time to start. So can everybody hear me? Not necessarily in this room, but Kunz, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, good. What about Wake Forest?
Yes, we can hear you.
Good. Any questions you have about the test next week? Yes, George?
What's the material?
The material will be whatever we cover through Monday of next week. So whatever we cover through Monday of next week, which basically means chapter 2 of the book, 2 and 3 of the book, right? So whatever is in chapter 2 and 3 is a fair game. Anything else you want to ask? Yes?
Does it depend on calculator?
You can bring your calculator.
But you're not gonna use it.
I don't think it will do you much good. However, no laptops are allowed. No laptops are allowed. If your calculator can connect to the outside world, like if you have iPhone, no. But otherwise, yeah. So you can bring your calculator, but I'm reasonably sure it will not do you much good. Okay. So what we were doing was we started studying small deformations. So by small deformations we mean, well, let me write here first. Some people call it infinitesimal deformations. If you hear the word that we are using a linear theory automatically implies small deformation. So a person does not have to say we are using infinitesimal deformations. If somebody says we are using linear theory, that implies we are using small deformations. So in small deformations, the strain tensor we wrote, Green-Saint Venant strain tensor, we wrote as UA comma B plus UB comma A plus UI comma A UI comma B. So that's the definition of finite strain. So this is finite theory. And we also wrote the other strain tensor was UI comma J plus Uj comma I minus Uk comma I Uk comma J. So the first one is Green-Saint Venant, second one is Almansi-Hamel, and we have talked about these in the class. So for small deformations or infinitesimal deformations, these terms are negligible as compared to the first order terms. So these terms are negligible. What we are saying is that Ui comma J is of order epsilon, and epsilon is much, much less than 1. Similarly, UA comma B is of order epsilon, and epsilon is much, much less than 1. It's so small that epsilon square is negligible as compared to epsilon. That's the assumption. So and that really depends upon the problem you are studying. Sometimes even 0.1% strain, which means 0.001, and if you square it, you get like, so if I take say epsilon equal to 0.001, which is 0.1% strain. So this is 10 to the minus 3. So epsilon square is 10 to the minus 6. And generally, you will say epsilon square is very small as compared to epsilon. Like it's 1/1000th of epsilon. For most cases, you can neglect epsilon square terms, but there may be problems where you may not be able to neglect epsilon square terms even if epsilon is 10 to the minus 3. So if you are studying instabilities like buckling or some other kind of instability in the body, you may not be able to neglect epsilon square term as compared to epsilon, even though epsilon is of the order of 10 to the minus 3. So it depends upon the problem. In other problems, even if you say strain is 1%, which means epsilon is 0.01, you might be able to neglect epsilon square as compared to epsilon. Like in plasticity, which means permanent deformations, we up to 1% strain, we still say small strains. So it all depends upon the application. So I cannot give you a universal rule, okay, that if epsilon is 10 to the minus 3 or 10 to the minus 5, just neglect epsilon square. Of course, you can always keep the quadratic term, but if you keep the quadratic term, then you have to do more work. So a theory that considers all of the terms is called geometrically nonlinear. I have already said that before in the class. So a theory that considers all of the nonlinear terms, like considers strain defined by this or by the second equation, is called geometrically nonlinear. So you will see in the literature words being used. Our approach is geometrically nonlinear, or we consider geometric nonlinearities. All they are saying is that our strain displacement relation is nonlinear. And if somebody says we are using a linear theory, that means we are neglecting the quadratic terms. And that's what you did in mechanics of deforms class. In your undergraduate courses and the linear elasticity course, if you take next semester, you are going to discard the quadratic terms. Okay, so if you discard the quadratic terms, life becomes very easy. Life becomes very easy if you neglect quadratic terms. It becomes easy because now we are going to neglect the quadratic terms. So our strain is given by the symmetric part of displacement gradients. So we do not have the quadratic term. So if U equals U1 plus U2, which means I take the body in the reference configuration, I first say twist it, and then I stretch it. See, first you apply torsion, and then you apply extension. And that reminds me, in that homework problem, the one you just, actually I returned, this assignment number 6, problem number 1, many of you sent me emails asking what is the value of mu and nu, and you should take to plot the deformed shape. Okay. Several of you sent me an email because it said plot the deformed shape of this circle. Can all of you read this or not? No? Okay. Sorry. So I think you have this homework assignment number 6. So if you take the first two equations, square them and add them, what you get is x1 square plus x2 square equals the mu square. So a circle is deformed into a circle. All is happening is the radius of that circle is changed. So if you do small deformation theory, linear theory, this is a torsion problem. This is a torsion of a circular bar. So if you do small deformation theory, there is no change in the length and there is no change in the cross section. But if you do a large deformation theory, like take a tissue from your skin and twist it, the length changes. And that's what the next line means, x3 equal to nu times big X3. So the length changes. I did not say length increases, it changes. Whether it becomes longer or shorter depends upon the material of the body. And you can try this. You really need to have a sophisticated experiment, or your specimen should be very long. So this effect was observed by pointing about 200 years ago. So it's not something that we are coming up with today. This was discovered or observed by Poynting 200 years ago. And what he did, he took a long wire. See, we are now used to dealing with specimens of the size of a few millimeters or a few centimeters. He took wires, say, 100 yards long or 100 meters long, and he put a mirror underneath it. So when he twisted it, he saw that the mirror was also moving down because the change in length was noticeable. Okay, if you take a specimen of the size of, say, 1 centimeter, of course you may or may not be able to see the change in length. Okay, so there was really no reason to give you the value of mu, because the circle is deformed into a circle. Okay, so you can always say the radius of the new circle is mu. That's why the value was not given. And some of you ask me, can I take x3 equal to 0? Can I take x3 equal to 1? It doesn't come into picture, right? Because circle goes into a circle, so no matter what is the value of x3, you still get a circle into a circle. So that's why x3 was not given. Okay. Of course, I kept on saying, can I take x3 equal to 0? Yes, you can take it. Because it doesn't really matter though, right? And then somebody said, can I assume the value of mu? Yes, you can assume the value of mu, because it doesn't matter though, because circle is going into a circle. And you are not plotting things to scale. It's not that you are plotting a circle of radius 1 centimeter. Okay, so coming back to our problem. Small deformations. Small deformation now. So if you twist it first and then stretch it, so you get the final configuration. So there is a displacement u1 here, and then the next displacement is u2. So u equals, which I already wrote, u equals u1 plus u2. And now if you substitute this in this equation, you get EAB, like twice EAB equal to UA comma B1 plus UA comma B2 plus UB comma A1 plus UB comma A2. Substitute U equal to U1 plus U2. So that equals twice of EAB1 plus twice of EAB2. Remember, I changed the notation for strains. I'm now using little e rather than big E. I'm using little e rather than big E because we are talking about small strains. Okay, and so the strains add. So you can use the principle of superposition. You can use the principle of superposition for small deformations, not for large deformations. You can use the principle of superposition for small deformations, but not for large deformations. Also, if you recall, we had like little ds over big ds was 1 plus twice EAB NA NB. So that is a stretch. That is a stretch along a line element parallel to vector n in the reference configuration. This is for large deformations. Okay. Now for large deformations, this is the stretch we derived. Now for small deformations, then So this sign means approximately equal to, and if you look at your keyboard, it's on the left top corner, the tilde sign. So one is, the upper is tilde, the lower one is equal. So that means approximately equal to. So if we are in small deformation, we replace big E by little e. So it's square root. So previously I wrote the square root explicitly. That means this is the same thing as raised to the power 1/2. Now this term, if E is very small, like of the order of epsilon, then EAB, NA, and B is also small. N is a unit vector. So all you are doing is you are adding 9 of these small quantities. So they cannot become 1. Because if you are adding 10 to the minus 3 9 times, all you will end up with is 10 to the minus 2. That's the maximum you will end up with. So we can use the binomial expansion or Taylor series expansion if you like. So this becomes 1 plus 1/2 times 2 EAB NA and B. And then we neglect the quadratic term because that's the assumption we are making in small deformation theory. So we neglect the quadratic term and ds over big ds minus 1 then equals EAB and A and B. So the axial strain, which means change in length per unit length in small deformation theory, is given by EAB and A and B. Okay, in small deformation theory, change in length per unit length is given by EAB and A and B. So what will be the maximum axial strain, or how will we find the principal axial strain, or how will we find the principal strain? Sir? What is the principal strain? Come on, you learned this in mechanics of deforms class. Okay. Also we covered in this class. We called it principal stretch rather than a principal strain before. So how did we find a principal stretch? Take the eigenvectors of CAB or BAB or EAB. Now I'm in small deformation theory. Okay? And I want to find maximum or minimum axial strain. So I want to find the direction along which the strain is maximum or minimum. So Josh Stenzler, how will I do it?
It's too far. Eigenvalues of little EAB?
Eigenvalues of little EAB will give me the principal axial strains. Eigenvectors of little EAB will give me the directions. Remember, you used to draw Mohr circle. In a three-dimensional problem, drawing a Mohr circle is a pain in the neck. It's true. I mean, it's not easy. It's a lot easier to find the eigenvectors and eigenvalues. All you have to do is punch in this number in your calculator or Mathematica, and out comes the eigenvalues and eigenvectors. So eigenvalues are the principal axial strains, and eigenvectors are the directions along which those axial strains are maximum or minimum. You don't like that?
No.
Huh? You got it?
Yeah.
So you will be able to answer it in the exam on Wednesday?
Yeah. Oh. Yeah.
Okay, good. Okay, also, I think when we started, we said this is differentiation with respect to big X, this is differentiation with respect to little x. That's the notation we have been using. So in small deformation theory, it does not make any difference. That's what I'm going to show you next. So if you take, say, ui comma j, by definition, this is delta ui over delta xj. This is the definition of ui comma j. So this is equal to delta ui over delta xl over delta xj by chain rule of calculus is summed on L. Okay, it's summed on L. So, but what is XL? XL, that's the initial coordinate equals the final coordinate. What is the next term? So what we are saying is initial coordinate equals the final coordinate and yes, minus ui. Good. So it's minus ui delta il. It's like initial displacement, sorry, initial coordinate equals final coordinate minus displacement. So now if you find delta xl over delta xj, we will get delta ij delta il minus delta ui over delta xj delta il, and substitute back in here. Substitute for delta xl over delta xj. So what we get then is that ui comma j equals delta ui over delta xl, and this becomes delta jl minus quantity which has substitute for delta xl over delta xj. Did I do it okay? And now, by assumption, this quantity is negligible as compared to the first one. That's the assumption in linear theory. So what we get then is that ui comma j is the same or approximately the same as this quantity. Yes.
You have 3 eyes.
Oh, I have 3 eyes. That's not good. Good. Thank you. You told me. Thanks. Yeah, it's not good, right? So this I and I should have changed it to k. Thank you. I mean, here it was okay, but when I substituted, I have another I there, so that messed up the whole thing. So I should have used maybe k. So what does it tell us? In small deformation theory, it makes no difference whether you differentiate displacement with respect to little x or big X. And that's why in many linear elasticity books, like Skolnikov's book or Love's book, which are classical books in linear elasticity, they don't make any distinction between little x and big X. It's not needed. I mean, they are not exactly same, okay? Because little x equals big X plus displacement. So they are not exactly same. But when you take the derivatives, it does not make any difference. Okay, now, so let's go back to our familiar example. So that's the only thing we have learned probably in this class is P prime Q prime I equals FIA PQA. When we have written this equation, probably, I don't know, 100 times. So now what is Fia? So I have xi equal to big X plus displacement. Now I wrote the other way around. I wrote the final coordinate equals initial coordinate plus displacement. So if I plug it in for Fi, so I will have, it's not a good choice again, so I should make it say L and L, otherwise I will end up with too many A's. So if I differentiate it, I get delta LA, delta IL plus UI comma A, and there is a PQA. Is my differentiation making sense? Because if you differentiate big X1 with respect to if you differentiate big X1 with respect to big X1, you get 1. If you differentiate big X1 with respect to big X2, you get 0. So this thing is delta IA PQA all I did is I wrote this one as UI comma J, and as I showed you earlier, you can replace differentiation with respect to big X by differentiation with respect to little x. That's the first thing here shown here. So I'm using that. So I can say maybe this is approximately equal to that. I've replaced differentiation with respect to big X by differentiation with respect to little x. And now, so that's PQA plus UI comma J, I write it as UI comma J plus UJ comma I over 2 plus UI comma J over 2 minus UJ comma I over 2. And then this is delta JA PQA. Just one second. Oh, this should have been, yeah. So I wrote UI comma J as half plus half. I added this, subtracted the same thing. So I wrote this one as 1/2 plus 1/2. So that's these two terms. And then I added this and subtracted the same thing. Is it okay?
No, the question is something else. Why is that?
Oh, could you please press that button?
I cannot find it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
Why isn't the second one exactly equal to
This one?
the second?
This one?
It's almost equal, right?
It's, because I replaced differentiation with respect to little x by differentiation with respect to big X. So I went the other way around. So this was differentiation with respect to big X. Now I'm replacing it differentiation with respect to little x.
But if you follow the notations, they're exactly the same.
Not quite. See, UI comma A is delta UI over delta big XA. UI comma J is delta UI over delta little xj. In small deformation theory, the two are same. In large deformation theory, the two are not same. Okay. So then I add this and subtract the same, and the reason is the following. The first term is symmetric and the second one is skew symmetric. So what we get then is that P prime Q prime I equals the initial vector plus Eij delta JA PQA plus this skew symmetric part where EIJ is this quantity and the omega ij is this one. So omega ij is skew symmetric part and Eij is the symmetric part. Oh, sorry. Okay. I guess no, it's okay. Does it make sense? Ganesh? Is it okay?
I was wondering whether we use Dij and omega ij.
Oh, we did not use omega ij before.
Like we were using D and W.
No. That was velocity gradients were D's. See, previously we used delta Vi over delta Xj plus delta Vj over delta Xi was Dij. That was strain rate. That was strain rate tensor. This is displacement now. Yes?
So that's an omega?
Yeah, it's an omega, right. That's why I put that curly, on W I put that curl, this wiggly thing, so that I don't confuse you with W. So I don't know how else to indicate this is omega rather than W. This is displacement gradient, not velocity gradient. Strain rate tensor was in terms of, that was symmetric part of the velocity gradients. And the spin tensor was the skew symmetric part of the velocity gradients. These are displacement gradients. Now, one of you asked me after the class a couple of days ago, can I integrate Dij with respect to time and get strain? Pardon? So the answer is, so the question was, I repeat, the question was, is this thing equal to strain? And the answer is no. So the question was, is this thing equal to that? And the answer is no, it's not equal to that. If you are doing small strain theory, small displacement theory, then the answer is yes. But we are not, that question came up when we were doing large strain theory. See, small strains, things are very easy. So in the small strain theory, the answer to this question will be yes. In the large strain theory, the answer to this question will be no. A big no. Okay? In small strains, little x can be confused with big X when you are differentiating quantities, when you are integrating quantities. But in large strain theory, you cannot do that. In small strain theory, you can add corresponding components of strain and get the total strain. In large strain theory, you cannot do that. Okay? So large strain theory is matrix multiplication. In small strain theory is matrix addition. Addition is much simpler than multiplication. Okay. So what we have done is, the physical interpretation is that the change in length or the change in the position vectors. So this is the final position vector minus the initial position vector. So the change in the position vector of PQ, which is like final P prime Q prime minus PQ, that equals the sum of two parts. One part that gives the change in the length or change in the vector because of the strain. The other part is the change in the vector because of the rotation. So the first part is because of the change in the strain, and the other part is because of the change in the rotation. Okay, yes?
So these are similar to the R and U from the fourth?
It's not quite. Similar is, it depends how much you want to stretch it. Okay, see, in the large deformation theory, we said P prime Q prime. This vector was R U operating upon PQ. So one can say it is R U operating upon PQ. First U operates upon PQ and then R operates upon PQ. But you are not adding the results. So here what we are saying is, let U or strain operate upon PQ, let omega operate upon PQ, and you add the two results. In small strain theory. In large strain theory, you say let U operate upon PQ, and then R has to operate upon PQ. So large strain theory is matrix multiplications. Small strain theory is additions. Principle of superposition that you used and learned in your undergraduate class is applicable to small strains. It is not applicable to large strains. And maybe I should give you a homework problem in which I should say the body is first twisted and then stretched and find the strain, total strain. And second time, it is first stretched and then twisted and find the total strain. And you will see that they will come out to be different. Large deformation theories. Okay, not small deformation theory. In small deformation theory, of course, you can add things up. So it doesn't matter whether you twist first or stretch first. Katie, is it okay? Okay, now, so the next question comes, if I have Eij equal to 0, what kind of displacements are possible in the body that will not cause any strain? So what kind of displacements are possible in the body that will not cause any strain? And the second question comes, and I don't see Fred here, but Pierce also does experiments, but he does different kinds of experiments. And probably Jessica is going to do some kind of experiments, and Josh Stensler is doing some experiments. So now let's pick on Josh. So Josh, what he does, this is Josh Stensler, not you. So he takes a plate, and this is usually a laminated plate, so it's made up to at least 2 layers, and could be more than 2 layers. Doesn't matter. So he hits it with a ball or with a projectile or something. So let's assume that before hitting it, and he does put strain gauges. So let's say we put strain gauges. And this is a rosette. That means there are 3 strain gauges at the same point, not parallel to each other. And let's say we have done several of these. It's the same thing as like you put, when you go to, well, I guess all of you are young, you probably don't need a physical yet. But supposing you go to the doctor's office and they put strain gauges on you. So they want to see how your body is deforming when you are jogging. So it's the same thing here. So we put many strain gauges, say 100 of them. So I get you have this oscilloscope, you get these readings. So I have a reading of these strain gauges, and since they are in a plane, I can only read, if this is x1 and this is x2, so I can only read things in the plane, which means I can get E11, E22, and E12. You can take the readings of these strain gauges. Strain gauges read only change in length per unit length. But if you know this angle of this rosette, then you can find all three components, either by using strain transformation equations or by drawing a Mohr circle. And this you learn in your deforms class. Okay, so now Josh is more aggressive, so he puts all of this information into the Excel sheet. So he has data at 100 points, and he puts them in the Excel sheet. So he gives x1, x2, x3, x1 and x2 coordinates of each one of these points, and puts it in the Excel sheet and presses a button saying fit a least square curve. So what will be the outcome then? Outcome will be, he will get this as a function of x1, x2. E22, he will get this as a function of x1 and x2. And E12, he will get this as a function of x1 and x2. Okay. So now his advisor, Professor Goldborn, asked him, how do you know is your data correct? So what should Josh do now to make sure his data is okay or not?
Ask Anoop.
Pardon me?
Ask Anoop.
Ask Anoop. That won't help because Anoop is working with me, okay, so, and both of them are working on the same project. So asking Anoop will not do you any good, because Anoop is good in stress strain curve, and we have not talked about stress yet. So all we have is these three components of strain as functions of big X1 and big X2. So number one, did any strain gauge fail? Are the strain gauges reading correctly? Assuming they are reading correctly and none of them failed, how do we know that the experiment went well? Am I making sense?
Should it be related to that?
Oh, could you please press that?
It's related to that. So we have a specific direction that the strains are 0, so we need to find that and see if it gives us the 0 at that direction.
You are in the right direction. So we need to make sure that there is a displacement field that produces these strains. If there is no displacement field that can produce these strains, I don't think that experiment went well. So it's all bogus, that data. If there is no displacement field that can give rise to these strains, all the data is bogus. Okay, so we wasted our time and the resources in getting the data. So we have to make sure that the data we are getting is reasonable. Okay? So to make sure, E11 by definition then is delta U1 over delta X1. E22 is delta U2 over delta X2, and E12 is 1/2 delta U1 over delta X2 plus delta U2 over delta X1. Right? So what we have is, we have three equations. That's one way of looking at it. Those of you who are mathematicians and don't worry about experiments, so you look at it the following way. You have three equations now. First, second, and third, but we have only two unknowns, U1 and U2. So we have more equations than the number of unknowns. We have three equations, E11, E12, and E22, but we have only two components of displacement because we are on a plane now. So I see Mr. Cooper smiling because he knows the answer. So what should we do?
I think I know what you're going to say. I was going to add what I was thinking.
Please press that button.
Is the idea just you solve the system and make sure that Because two of them would automatically give a solution, but I did it with a third matching the other two.
Right. So there has to be some kind of relationship between these so that we can integrate these equations, or we can solve three of them for two unknowns. Remember, number of equations, generally speaking. The reason I keep on saying generally speaking is because if you go out and say that Dr. Batra taught us number of equations must equal the number of unknowns, it's not quite always true. Like, look at this equation. So we have one equation and 100 unknowns, x1, x2, x100. But this is not a linear equation. And if we require that the solution of this equation must be real, what is the solution? All x's must be 0. So x1 must be 0, x2 must be 0, x100 must be 0. So that's why I keep on using the word generally, normally, and so on, so that you don't go out and say, hey, he taught us wrong. Because if you come across this counterexample like 5 years from now, then you are going to say, hey, he doesn't know what he was talking about. Okay, but so I'm covering myself. However, if you have a linear problem, then the number of equations should equal the number of unknowns. And this is, we are doing a linear problem now. Okay, so as Don said, or Mr. Cooper said, we need to have a compatibility condition. We need to have some condition that satisfies some relationship between U1 and U2, some relationship between F, G, and H. So to get that relationship, so we differentiate, say, both sides with respect to x1 and x2. Take the third equation and let me put 2 here, so I don't have to keep 2 on the other side. So I'm transferring this 2 to the left side and differentiate everything with respect to x1 and x2. So we get delta q u1 delta x1 x2 square plus delta q u2 x1 square x2. Is this notation making sense, or is it am I using notation that's familiar to you? What this one means is you are differentiating with respect to x1 once and x2 twice. Okay? So this thing is the same as because partial derivatives commute, assuming these functions are continuously differentiable, so they commute. So I can write like this, and my first term is delta u1 over delta x1 is f, and the second one is g, so when Josh Strangler did the experiment and found these functions f, g, and h, unless those functions satisfy this condition, that data is useless. When experimentalists don't like to say the word that data is useless. Okay. Of course, everybody should believe that whatever I am doing is correct. However, all of us are human beings. And human beings do make mistakes. So it's a good to check it. And this is a check. So what we can say is this is sanity check on our work. And same thing happens in numerical work. Again, one has to check the work. Just because you ran the code and got numbers doesn't mean they are right. So unless F, G, and H satisfy this condition, the data is not very useful. And this condition is called compatibility condition. Compatibility condition. If you are given the displacements, then of course you don't have to check anything. But if you are given strain fields, and in this case we are talking about E11, E22, and E12, next time we will talk about if all 6 components of strain are given, then how do we find the compatibility condition? So if this condition is satisfied, then you can integrate these 3 equations and find U1 and U2. Okay? Well, have a nice weekend.